Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt,
And I'm Eric.
and this week we are going to be talking about the new horror release, Longlegs. And we will also be talking about our top three films from the first half of 2024. So that should be fun. Eric and I had the same films. I think that a couple of them are in slightly different order, but that'll be the fun part to discover. But before we dive into that, there was actually some pieces of news this week that I thought kind of play into shows we've had the last 2 weeks. First was last week, neither Eric nor I was very bullish on the fourth installment of the
Minions sucked.
the Minions franchise. And both of us were like, hey, maybe it's time for them to wrap this up. Well, it made a mint at the box office. They're talking about Despicable Me 5, which I can't, and they right away announced Minions, the third standalone Minions movie, will be out in July of 2026. Eric, is this just one of those franchises that for the next 20 years we're going to see them trot out with continuously diminishing returns for adult audiences?
So it is impressive to me that they're getting to a seventh movie? This would be two Minions movies and
Yeah,
four.
this will be the seventh feature film.
Yeah. And there was recently an announcement for Shrek 5, which I'm sort of curious about because that technically will be the first Shrek movie owned by Disney, which they're trying to not be public about, but that's a big deal. DreamWorks' ability to take potshots at some of the fantasy characters that Disney had without being under Disney's umbrella is kind of a core point of those original movies.
Well, that would end up being kind of the seventh for their franchise too, because we've seen two Puss in Boots movies.
Yes. So I'm kind of thinking like it's been a long time, but like some like Ice Age got to 5 or 6 installments. Like I feel like they run their course and they burn out. But I mean, as long as they make money, they make money. And so it's hard because they don't feel like franchises that legitimately grow with an audience. It's like sticking around. Like I guess maybe there are some late Gen Z, early Gen Alpha sort of aged people who are going to have grown up with Minions and that's a staple of their household. But I don't know, man. It kind of feels like it doesn't feel as big as some of other things that like I come to mind in my head, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I know that's like the 80s and 90s. Pokemon is like the early 2000s. It just doesn't feel the same. Like there's some root thing to make it have staying power like that, but it does. They just keep making them. So
Well, and some of the things you mentioned, like the Turtles and even Pokemon, they reboot in different fashions with different casts and kind of different universes. I I think the Despicable Me Minions is getting tiresome, but it's still making money, so it makes sense. You bring up Shrek, that actually was probably more of a shock for me for two reasons. Shrek Forever After, the fourth one, was 2010. So by the time they come out, I think they were saying it's like 26 or 27 is when that. I don't
yeah,
think it's next year. I think it's
no,
the year after. That's you're talking about a pretty extended layoff.
16 years.
In addition, Mike Myers and Cameron Diaz don't do much anymore.
No.
I mean, Mike Myers pops up every now and again. Cameron Diaz was semi-retired before she came out to do some movie that's supposed to be coming out recently. So that's even more of it. You're talking about a 16-year layoff, and 2/3 of your star power is not what it was in 2001. So
Right.
that's kind of that was probably more of a shock. And I'll have to be honest, that was another film franchise where I wasn't clamoring for another one. That being said, I really did like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. So if they can capture some of that, I like that better than any of the Shreks or Puss in Boots that came before it. So maybe that one will get better. But I feel like
It all depends on what people decide to do with it. Like, I mean, I was saying with Despicable Me 4. If someone actually cared about the concept, I think there's a lot you can do with the idea of a reformed villain living in a superhero world trying to just be a dad. Like that is an entertaining concept that you can do things with. And as far as the minions go, there's almost limitless possibilities where you take just a sort of gaggle of minions who may or may not be affiliated with anyone in this superhero supervillain universe, and it's almost like a blank canvas of like Looney Tunes or something where you can just sort of come up with any clever idea that you want and give it to them. I mean, they tried to give them superpowers in this last Despicable Me movie, but they did nothing with that. So it's like, I don't know, why don't you
But
actually
maybe
give them
they will.
right? Like
maybe that's what I'll focus on. Oh, and the Minions movies are interesting because the first Minions movie, they were kind of really detached from Despicable Me, but the second standalone Minions movie was just a prequel for Gru, really, the Rise of Gru. So, we'll see. Are we focusing on the super soldiers? Are we? I just feel like the Minions are fun for 20 minutes. And when you're giving me a 90-minute movie, you can see the ratio of Minions to fun really kind of falls off.
Feel like projects never really get their due that like there was this show set in the DC universe that was created a little while ago that was just about like the number crunchers, like people on the ground living in the world. I don't remember what it's called. Danny Pudi from Community was in it. Powerless, it might have been called. But
I think that is it.
I feel like every once in a while they try this. They try like look at the underlings, like the people who are not usually the main focus of the story, and make something with it. And I don't think I can name like the A-tier franchise that would be about.
That Powerless show was a lot older than we remember. 2016.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah, no, that's about right because it would have been
Vanessa Hudgens, Danny Pudi. So.
Yeah.
That was pretty fun. It only made 13 episodes, though. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, they don't go very far. I don't know if it's people don't have the right idea for shows about this kind of thing, or if they just see it as like an opportunity to do some slapstick cartoon things for kids and they don't give it more thought than that. I don't know. If you're gonna make a movie, make a movie. If it looks like it has an idea, then hey, okay. It's just, why are we doing this if that's all anyone feels about it is, hey, okay, like whatever.
I'm just glad to know the future of animation is secured as the 7th and 8th film in a franchise comes out. So.
Right. Goodness gracious.
Speaking of sequel news, so a couple weeks ago we reviewed Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1, which I think both of us liked. Was interesting. I'm curious to see how the story will continue. Chapter 2 was set to come out on August 16th. It is no longer coming out on August 16th. It has been pulled with no current release date given. Supposedly, this is to help more people be able to find the first film and build excitement, which makes some sense. But obviously, they are going to do a large push when it comes to VOD and onto streaming platforms. Supposedly, Kevin Costner was set to go back into production on Chapter 3 in August. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, I read, do not actually have distributors at this point. So how are we feeling about part of the appeal for me with Chapter 1 is you don't get a lot of resolution or closure. You really don't get any resolution and closure unless your character died. It was continuing vision that was supposed to come out over 4 installments. Number 2 is already done, and they're working on 3, which means there's very little chance, if any, that number 2 is going to provide any permanent set of closure. I would assume it's going to come out at some point, But this to me felt like a little bit of a grim sign. I also couldn't help but think if the 6 week gap between releases probably wasn't a great idea. I'm wondering if they would have been better served too, not putting this movie out in the middle of summer and putting out like a 3 hour Western epic sometime in like October, November, and then dropping a part two sometime in February or March, just a different time of
Yes.
year with a different type of audience expectation.
Yes.
I'm hoping we get to see
But
it though.
yeah, that placement that you just said, I agree with 100%. Like when people are expecting long, drawn out Oscar contender dramas, you put this movie that is going to have like tension and a little bit of action spectacle and a little bit more to it. And so you have an audience that's already ready to see something like this, and then this stands out a little bit. Then people care. Then you sit and you wait on it for a little while, and it gets a VOD release in like early January well, I know people are doing it way sooner than that, but I would put it
No,
out like
you don't
early
have
January.
to. I mean, some have resisted, and it's benefited them. Oppenheimer waited a really long
Should.
time. I
Yeah,
just read something that Bad Boys 4 has said. We're going to wait on VOD releases. We're still making money in the theater.
good for them. So yeah, it's just it would be then right when everyone is curious to watch it and they've already seen part one, then you kick it off early in spring when it's not competing with other summer blockbuster releases, and then everyone is along for the ride, and you can put out 3 and 4 wherever you want it, because anyone who has seen 1 and 2 is going to be, you might have a rough bit with 3 because it's not the end, but still, once you have people 2 movies invested in a thing, it's going to be really hard to not
Might
make
end up
money on a
being
third
the
one.
end.
Kevin Costner talked about really badly wanting to make this movie to make sure he just sees it in his lifetime. And I'm sorry, but like if you jumped the gun here and now you haven't made
Well,
2
and
movies and now nobody
not
wants to make them.
realizing that until I read that there is no distribution deal currently for 3 and 4 would make me super nervous about seeing. I'm wondering if 2 has something of a resolution, following maybe that
Can
TV
be
show
edited.
model or 3, which they're currently working on, but it's going to be interesting to follow, I think, the rest of this year to see how, if the movie gains some traction and some second audience. And we've seen that before, where a first installment of a film franchise was tepidly received at the theaters but built kind of a cult following, and by the time part 2 comes out, it ends up being a big explosion. So
I mean, this isn't Dune. Like Dune came out 2020. I don't think we know what it really would have done at the box office because of the split and everything and digital and whatnot. But I think we've pretty clearly learned from Dune Part 1 and 2 that is a movie that didn't necessarily hit with its core audience immediately. And then by the time the second one came out, everyone who liked it had figured out that they liked it and were ready for it. And then it just exploded. Like, but I don't think this is that. I mean, maybe if it awakens
but
like a
maybe it can
cult of
do
people who
better
are
than
missing the Western.
maybe than $11 million opening. I mean, it was going up against A Quiet Place, still very close after Inside Out, and right before another big holiday weekend. I'm not sure summer was the best landing spot for that. I
Yeah,
think
I don't
that's
think so.
probably something to think about. Well, that'll do it for news. Now it is on to, we mentioned it's been a big year for horror movies so far, and July will continue to be, as will August. We're getting a lot of tentpole releases in that genre, and that was the case this week as we got a new release from Neon, Longlegs. This is one of 2 horror movies they have seeded in the summer. They will have a movie called Cuckoo that comes out on August 9th. But this one had a very mysterious marketing campaign and trailer. They didn't tell you a lot about it. They didn't show you a lot of footage out of it. I actually liked that. I also eschewed a lot of the public publicity and marketing materials, because after I saw the first trailer, that gave me an idea of what this was going to be about, kind of a creepy period hunt of a young FBI agent going for a serial killer. That was good enough for me. We won't really talk much about plot here. Suffice to say, that is the setup. Micah Monroe is plays Agent Lee Harker. The film is set sometime in the early to mid 90s, based on the aesthetics and some of the visual clues, like a picture of Bill Clinton in the FBI offices where they would normally hang the sitting president's picture. She gets paired with or tapped by an older veteran agent played by Blair Underwood to help as they look for a mysterious killer named Longlegs, refers to himself as Longlegs, who has left them some coded notes. You get an early shot with Longlegs, though you don't see all of his face. You have a very unsettling midriff kind of shot. You can hear the voice. You see some images, but they really want to set that up to be more of a reveal later in the film. But if you're watching the movie as early as 5 minutes in the opening credits, they tell you that that part is played by Nicolas Cage, and that's been part of the marketing. So that much is not a surprise. I mentioned I had some serious, Silence of the Lambs vibes watching the trailer, and I think that is something they're going for. I felt kind of some of the vibes of films in that genre, or other Thomas Harris kind of based films, Manhunter from the 80s stylistically. I mean, that resonated. Some other darker serial killer films, people have said they got some Seven vibes, they got some Zodiac vibes. I mean, there are some. It is definitely kind of in that genre. I think that's what I was expecting, and I was happy with this. I think the marketing has been both great and also probably a little frustrating toward expectations. Some people have said it's like the greatest horror movie ever. And there was an interesting Twitter conversation that got me to thinking, horror is a broad genre that has a lot of different styles and subgenres under it, which you and I would recognize. However, I think for most mainstream audiences, when they hear that word, they think of slasher films, and this is decidedly not that. It is a thriller. It is going for something completely different. And I think from people that I have interacted with that didn't like it, I think that is an aspect that they bump up against their expectation of what they thought it was going to be. And the way that it tries to create mood and tension. For me, that really worked. That is right up my alley of films that I like. I'm giving this one 2 thumbs up. I loved Nicolas Cage here. I think for me, he would be on a short list for award nomination time. And I say that as somebody who has jokingly said that he should lose his Academy Award for some of the performances he's given in some of the very B, C, and D films we've seen from him in the last 20 years. This brought me all the way back. I really liked Micah Monroe. The film comes from Oz Perkins, who is Anthony Perkins' son, who has done some other horror movies. And actually, I forgot until somebody posted it, was a minor supporting character in, was it Legally Blonde?
Yeah.
I looked at him. I'm like, right. I really like this. It met my expectations because I was expecting more of that kind of psychological thriller. It does have some supernatural elements. It's not exactly like those other films, which is good. That's fine. It creates its own vibe. I liked the period setting. I liked the way they put it together. This is another film where I thought the score really augmented what they were doing too. They created some real tension in the way things were shot and scored, and I was very impressed with what they did here.
I think everything about the discourse around this movie comes down to how a person fills in the blanks in their own head. I think that when you're watching the trailers and previews and marketing for this movie, there's a suggestion of a tone, and there's a lot for you to fill in the blanks and create your own assumptions for what the movie's going to be. I think I was lucky to talk to you beforehand because I'm not entirely sure what I got from it, but having the expectation of something along the lines of Silence of the Lambs, there's a little bit of Zodiac vibes of that kind of thing, I think served me well, because then when the movie felt like that was like this much of it and the rest of it was just a completely different vibe. I I the complaints that I've seen for the most part on this movie not being good just come down to what works for someone and what doesn't. I know that seems like obvious to say, but what I mean is some people are directly complaining about the pacing of the movie and some people are championing the movie for its pacing. And I think standalone shots, the way this movie is directed, there's a large depth of field and there's a single like middle of the frame person. So there is a whole lot of your eyes are tempted to search the background. You're tempted to look for things. If there's a noise that happened over here, you're watching over this shoulder to see if something pops up to scare somebody. And there is a lot of nothing is actually happening, but you are sitting with the possibilities of what could happen. And I think that is either going to be something you enjoy experiencing, or you're going to be like some of the people I've seen complain about the movie, where it's like, what was I supposed to feel something because nothing happened? It's like, okay, that's not personally where I land. I believe that the sense of dread that the movie built up was super effective. I believe that even on a rewatch, I'm still going to be scanning for things to make sense of what's going on. Like, I feel like there are details that I only barely caught, like a preacher blurry on the background in a television placed carefully over the person's shoulder. Like, there are barely things that happen, and I'm like, I'm expecting a jump scare to happen, so I might not have paid attention to what was actually happening. And there's everything about the pieces that aren't Nicolas Cage worked for me. And then there's Nicolas Cage, which is a whole other thing. People are either going to laugh at this performance or they're going to be very unsettled and gripped by this performance. And I think they do an amazing job, again, by letting you fill in the blanks in your own head, and they only gradually reveal more and more to you, trying to hope that that is less of a surprise and more like unsettling. And I still stand by, I think that overall this movie would have been served better as a movie. I get why it's not that. I get that nobody else is Nicolas Cage and nobody else could serve the movie's publicity or anything the way that he does or anything like that. I just think practically what this movie is, if it was an unknown actor, I think they would have got everything that it felt like they were asking for. Like asking you to be curious to gradually let this person's image seep into your head. Well, I know what Nicolas Cage looks like. I know what he looks like as Dracula. I know what he looks like with makeup all over his face. I know some things. This is unsettling, and it's very well directed, but I know it. And I know what's going to happen when he starts yelling in a car on his own. And I know so many things that it lost a little bit of that. So I'm going with one solid thumb up. I thought this was extremely effective. I do think it's one of the best horror movies of the year. I'm so happy I wasn't alone in the theater or with just strangers, because I don't know what I would have been like just not knowing the people that are sitting around me and dealing with these emotions. Wow.
Yeah, I mentioned this to you when we were talking pre-show, but the one thing that strikes me, so from the very early, when they basically had a teaser trailer that offered you no footage from the film, you hear a voice, but then you see it says Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage. So
Yeah.
the whole marketing, and I do wonder, you said an unknown actor, that would have been one way to go. I think another way to go would be the marketing campaign, or the way they did it with Seven, which is you have a very good and well-known actor who at that time was, I believe, coming off of an Academy Award nomination for The Usual Suspects, because I think Seven was 96 or 95. It's right in that range. And they don't, and apologies to anyone that doesn't want to hear this name now for wholly other reasons, but they don't use Kevin Spacey's name in the opening credits in any of the marketing. They never show an image of him. In the 90s was a whole different beast in terms of promotion and social media and everything. So who knows if they could have kept that hidden quite as well in the modern age of social media. But I wonder, because the movie itself spends a long time building up to this reveal, and they even talk about the fact that Micah Monroe was not allowed to see him until she got put into a scene with him, so that her reaction to his whole look and aesthetic would be,
I love that sort of thing,
authentic.
Yeah,
we could have maybe done that a little bit better for the audience, and would it have hit you different? Because I thought he was very effective in the performance, and honestly, the last couple of years, it's been nice to see that the old Nick Cage that we all enjoy has been back in there. I liked him playing a meta version of himself in the Massive Talent movie last year, and I thought he was really, really great here. I thought he was pretty good as Dracula in the one with Nicholas Hoult. Renfield, yeah. So it's been nice to see that range and get him getting some better projects maybe the last few years, and I thought he was great here. But you're right. It conjures a certain expectation, an earned expectation, because he's been the king of B, C, and D movies over the last few years, and has done a number of over the top horror films.
That's the other thing. If he had maybe not made some of these B, C, and D movies, if this had been one of the first or few times that we had seen him act like this, I think I would have been way more uncomfortable with the whole thing. Like I don't know what I would have expected. Yeah. Like that's a missed opportunity almost.
I think every film is so subjective too in personal tastes and what works and doesn't work for people. There have been a lot of praise for this movie, and a lot of people have felt the same way we do, but I've seen a fair number of people for whom it didn't work. And sometimes the weight of built expectations too. That's why I wanted to see it ASAP. I saw a preview screening because, you knew that weight of expectation, and reading a lot of reviews and hearing a lot of comments, and that is one thing. It feels like the times we live in, every week the next movie that comes out is like the greatest or the best sometimes if it takes a while to get to something, or if your expectations are through the roof, it can kind of let you down. I feel like some of the movies that I've liked the best this year were ones where I went in with modest to no expectations and let the power of the performance and the story wash over me. Speaking of some of the best of the year, I'm glad Longlegs was our original film, because both of us liked that. We are going to talk about our top three, the movies that were sitting in our top three position on July 1st, when the first half of the year ended. I will have to say that because of Longlegs, one of these films is no longer sitting in my top three moving forward, but they were there.
I was curious about that when you sent me your top three. I was like,
Well, I'm just counting the first half of the year, which is basically at the end of June 30th, to see where you are, because things always shift. Although I would say both of ours probably have the same at number one. And given the trajectory of the year, it's hard to imagine that it's going to slide much out of top three position unless we have a real fantastic finish. But why don't you kick us off? What was your number three?
See, now I have to actually pick which one is at number three. It's Civil War.
Yeah,
it's Civil War. It's
which we have to say takes on a whole new level of weirdness after the events of yesterday. But Civil War was for both of us. I had it sitting at number 2, but
Extremely more necessary.
it's kind of a toss up for me between that and I'm assuming that your number 2 is Challengers, which I have at 3. They're real close for me.
For me, it's my 1 and 2 and my 3, and then other movies. Well, actually 3, 4, and 5 are real close. But Civil War, I think I really feel like it's important increasingly, especially after the last couple of days. It's incredibly important. And you know what, it makes me think of Star Wars. And I know that makes no sense, but here's the deal. Star Wars at its core is a franchise, whatever the intent was. The core story was always this: there is fighting and there is conflict over divide between a light side and a dark side. A light side that is supposed to move towards peace, defense, and thought, and the cultivation of knowledge and things that are progressive and patient and long-term stable building of joy. And the ease, the destructive nature of quickly getting what you want and gaining power in rapid succession, never really being able to stand on your own 2 legs and constantly have to cut the person out from under you to stay on top, and just the dark nature of humanity. And the core idea is you have Luke Skywalker, the protagonist. Movie 1 goes to blow up the Death Star and learns, hey, I can fight. Fighting is the answer. Movie 2 learns that, hey, if you keep relying on fighting, you're going to do nothing but perpetuate the same problems. And then he's like, well, whatever. I'm going to go fight anyways because I am saving my friends, so I'm fighting for a good reason. And then he's destroyed. And movie 3, he finally says, you know what? Maybe I'm going to be destroyed, but I'm going to turn off my lightsaber. I'm going to throw it away, and I'm going to stop fighting. And that is how he ultimately becomes a Jedi. That is how this redeems this other character. That is how the entire thing is won, is because we realize that we will never have a stable future as a human species if we continue to act the way that we act. And Civil War spoke to that so hard. The genuine level of flash forward a couple of years into the chaos of what the reality would be of 2 sides of the country fighting. Not a Hollywood version. No, well, I mean, it is Hollywood, but it's not, oh, Texas and California seceded and they're 2 opposite sides and there are battles, and isn't it tragic that brother fights against brother? No. Those are romantic ideas that are never going to be true. The reality is going to be there is going to be some stranger in a house who starts shooting at you, and if you don't shoot back, they're going to kill you, and you don't know if they're a good guy or a bad guy. You don't know if they believe what you believe or don't believe. Everything is chaos. Everything you think you structure your world by is based on the structure of your family, your friends, the internet, and all of this. And I do think this is a movie that is making me think these things. It probably sounds a little more like I'm projecting a lot of my stuff onto the movie, but I do believe that for a movie that turned out to mostly be a road trip journalism movie, it is wildly more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, and I think it also, things that are important for us, regardless of how you feel in 2024 as we approach an election, the importance of journalism and the idea of objective truth that they talk about here, of presenting, in fact, I really liked one of the sequences when Kirsten Dunst's character, she gets questioned by Callie Spaney's younger photographer, why aren't you telling them what they should do? And she says, that's not my job. My job is to show them what is happening, what is going on, and to force them to ask themselves the hard questions about what they believe and what they want to stand for and be. And that, we don't get a lot of that now. We don't get a lot of just this is what it is, and challenging you get, everything seems like it has a lot of spin or a viewpoint. And I think the other thing it looks at is what happens when a country, when what polarizes and divides grows stronger than what unites. And I think that's a real, both of those are things that we really are going to have to consider as a nation as we go through the next 4 months. A lot of people were calling out and calling back to this yesterday after the events of what happened for various reasons. But those are things that sat with me in April, and I think they're just as true now as when I first saw it. This movie is available on VOD right now. I'm sure it will be coming to streaming pretty soon. I think it's A24 right now. A24 has a deal with Max. So I think they may have actually even I'll try to find. I think they may actually have even given a date for when it's going to stream on Max. So becoming more readily available.
It should be very soon because it's also in stores now. I was able to buy a copy this week.
Yeah, and it's it's available on VOD and stuff, but usually they have it for sale for a little while before it goes to free streaming if you have a streaming service. My number 3 was actually Challengers. Challengers Civil War, pretty close. I loved the production here. I love the performances. It has been a powerhouse year for Zendaya. I don't want anyone to forget that. She still has given 2 of my favorite lead actress performances of the year for this and our number 1 movie. I thought Josh O'Connor and Mike Feist are very good in this. The production, the way that they build tension, the ongoing game that's going on that sets the stage. One of my favorite movies, if you've been following along, by films of 1999 recap, is a movie called For Love of the Game, which ironically has Kevin Costner, but is about a baseball pitcher who is in the middle of pitching a perfect game. But while he's doing it, it's cutting back to these things in life because he has all this on his mind about a personal relationship, about the future of his professional career, about his health, about what he wants in life. And he's thinking about all this while he's doing this game, and you're getting these scenes. I thought the way they cut that together, obviously completely different styles. One of them, Michael Shara novel, directed by Sam Raimi, that's kind of a conventional romance. This was going for a completely different romantic tension story, but that idea of the building tension of both the game that is being waged on the court and the game that is being waged in their life over, it's got to be a decade at least. I think this is another movie too where some of the production choices either really worked for people or didn't. I loved the choices they made with score in particular, and I have, from people who have disliked this, I think that is one of the biggest complaints that I've heard is some of these production things. But where did this fall for you? I know it's in your top 3. Was this your number 2 also?
If number 1 weren't just an achievement of making something difficult to succeed, which this kind of is. Again, I remember my big stickler about Challengers, which is my number 2. I'm going to make it my number 2. I don't know how I'll feel at the end of it. I need to see this again so badly. But
this one also available on VOD now.
Yeah. This is a story that I would not have wanted to have known if it wasn't told like this. It is an achievement of filmmaking that makes this story so good. And I honestly, I would love to have a conversation with someone who does not like the movie to find out what they feel. To me, I was compelled by so much of what happened, particularly the music.
Our mutual friend.
Really? He does not like the music in it.
That was among the complaints, yeah.
That is insane to me because
it didn't work for everyone. I've seen a few people that have bucked against. It was a choice. And for me, it was a choice that totally worked, but
Right, but also so much of the feeling of the movie comes from that score kind of pounding and carrying the pace through. Like, I don't know what I would be feeling if my mind was left to wander without that direction. Like, it's just, it's so interesting that it wouldn't be that movie. Like, which, again, is another thing that's obvious to say. A movie wouldn't be the same if you made it different. But I don't know. It's just very, Luca Guadagnino is incredible at taking things that could be mundane, making them extremely fascinating, or taking what's fascinating about them and highlighting it, and then making things feel very human and inhuman in the most interesting ways. And I was absolutely blown away by this. I thought it was going to be interesting. I thought it was going to be, I might like it because so far I've liked everything I've seen by him, but oh,
So it looks like it says late August or early September for Max for Civil War. Challengers, I can't remember the studio, will probably be a Hulu drop, I think.
okay. Oh gosh.
Or actually, you know what? I think Challengers is Peacock drop.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say it's gonna be floating on Disney Plus because they have the Hulu plugin, so you just like right next to Bambi is Challengers. Like, goodness gracious, they already had that with Poor Things. Like, that was the first time I found out that had come to streaming. Is I was looking up something for Disney to watch with my son, and I was like, oh no.
Well, both of them are available on VOD right now.
Yeah,
Uh,
please watch them.
Actually, it's saying Challengers is going to MGM Plus, which I think will be.
Has that started yet? Is MGM Plus?
Yeah, it is, but it's a very niche.
I was gonna say, what do they have? Just James Bond movies, or what?
No, and they have some original programming. So it must have been an MGM movie. That's what I forgot. It just. So it'll eventually work its way out to something else. And like A24 used to have a deal with Paramount, and they just recently switched, and now their deal is with Max. So like Iron Claw came out there. That's why I knew.
Okay.
Civil War. There is no question about where the movie that's going to be one for us is available to stream, and it is on Max now. That is Dune Part 2, released on March 1st. And I'll start by saying this was a moderate surprise for me because I was mid on the first Dune. I thought it was a technical masterpiece, but I wasn't really in love with the story or anything else. And I rewatched it literally 2 days before I went to see the second one, and it didn't change a lot for me. But there was something about the richness of character and story and performance that worked a lot more on an emotional level for me, even with what they do with Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya. And maybe it is because Zendaya's character isn't really a big part of the first one, and there's just so much plot and exposition and story that they're trying to churn through that you don't get to know Paul. I do think the second movie spends more time with who these people are and what makes them interesting and compelling. But I thought it was incredible. It was instantly up at the top of my list after I saw it, and it's been a goodly amount of time, and it hasn't come off. We still obviously have half a year left to go. But we've seen movies in that early springtime. Everything Everywhere All at Once was a March release once upon a time as well, and stayed pretty well at the top of people's lists all the way through to winning Best Picture. I would think this movie was a big Academy Award contender for part one. I would think it should be a huge contender not only for the technical awards, but I think it'd probably be in line for some acting awards for this one as well.
Yep, I think so. I think this is gonna go the Lord of the Rings route, and I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later because this isn't, despite the way that they set it up, this isn't your traditional 3-part story being told in 3 parts. This was a 2-part story that there is a sequel to. And so it's very bizarre, kind of the way they left things. I've talked to my wife who's read Dune Messiah and about how that might adapt into a third movie and what that's going to be like. But I don't know. I see this kind of getting with Lord of the Rings. Return of the King was basically rewarded for all 3 of those movies because they were one movie made at one time, released 3 years apart. And I see this being like a stronger contender, but like, why? Because it damn well deserves it. It's the scale of this, the level of care and attention to detail, the performances almost across the board. I've seen some people criticize that there's not a lot of like humanity and not a lot of humor or levity, like kind of a break from the constant serious tone of what's happening. And I don't know. I just watch a different movie. I don't know. I have the
Not all movies need to have comedy.
no, and I just the lore, the way, how do you make a desert planet? I don't know. We have so many franchises with desert planets, but I think this is by far the way to make a desert planet the most interesting, just because it's a desert planet. And I don't know. I think, all right, Austin Butler, spectacular. His character, barely on screen. The character's decisions, barely on screen. The consequences of his decisions, barely on screen. He was still a revelation. It was incredible. Like the technical workings of how they filmed his home planet, then the just work of the actor trying to take inspiration from Stellan Skarsgård and mold that into something and just keep twisting himself into all these different roles. I mean, he's such a star. Like, he is so becoming something. I don't know. I think that just looking at his character, it's like a microcosm of what works for me so much about the movie. I believe him as that crazy, silly thing that he's being. And I think he's very good as that crazy, silly thing that he's being. And that's how I feel about all of Dune.
Yeah, and it, like I said, it was definitely surprising. It was also a surprise to my pocketbook because I then had to buy part 1 because I was going to get part 2, and I thought it would be stupid to have only one of them. So that was also a blow, just to me financially. But
it was worth both of them.
Yeah, very epic. Be curious to see what they do with part 3, and those are 3 good ones you can get at home, either VOD, both Challengers and Civil War. You can also rent online, and as I mentioned, Dune Part 2 is streaming on Max if you have that service, or it is also still available on VOD and rent from VOD spots. But I'm excited to see what the rest of this year has to offer, and that kicks off next week. July has been a better than expected month because I liked Maxine, which almost gave me a heart attack. I really liked Longlegs and the other movie that opened this week, which was Fly Me to the Moon, which I actually have up in my top 10 too. That one's going to come to Apple TV Plus pretty soon. But next week we are diving full on into Glenn Powell.
Yeah.
We are getting Twisters, and we will look back at the original 1996 Twister, but we will also look at Glenn Powell's other movie from earlier this summer, and that was Hitman, his Richard Linklater film, which is on Netflix. So you can go ahead and stream that one on Netflix and get ready to, you don't chase your fears, you ride them.
Yeah.
So until next time, unless we get swept away by a tornado, we will see you at the movies.